All right, we got another special edition of Rare Candy. We have a guest today. We're going to be talking about COVID, lockdowns, vaccines, really hitting on the vaccine today because it's wintertime, right? It was the second wave, or I thought the second wave already happened, but okay.
It's like the 12th wave.
Yeah, it's the 12th wave. Let's be real. Are we counting the microwaves? I don't know. Right?
Yeah.
And so today we have on, and I'm just gonna say her name is Sarina. You're with us today to talk about this, and thanks for joining us, first of all. And I guess let's go into a little bit of like your background. So I guess to someone who's listening and say, what gives you the right to have these claims, right? Before we get into this.
Well, thank you for having me, and looking forward to this conversation. As for my background, I guess the simplest explanation, I have always been passionate about science. I grew up in a very free-thinking family, I guess, but my mom was also a microbiologist, has a background in science, and so she always emphasized that growing up, which led to me participating in science fairs for about 8 years, all the way like from second or third grade up until I graduated high school. And by the time I got to high school, I was actually working in a lab doing like cell biology research that I presented. And a lot of people don't realize like science fairs can lead you to like literally, and this was not me, but like the winners of the top international science fairs get literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in prizes and scholarships. So it's a very competitive space with very high stakes. I did not get that, but I competed in several of those international science fairs. And so I love science. I love the scientific method. I love scientific research. I went into college and I got a degree in biochemistry as well as policy studies. But I am also a big fan of true independent science that isn't politically and corporate driven. And that comes from just other things I care about, and environmentalism and animal rights, which I'm also passionate about. And so I don't take anything at face value. And I think that we all need to look at the evidence and data for ourselves as best as we can. And that anytime anything happens, whether it's a pandemic or vaccines or GMOs or whatever it is, I like to read the actual studies, the actual data, and the actual evidence, because I think it
science
gets
denier.
so biased.
Sorry, yeah, don't buy it. No,
that's how we met too. Was kind of, and we won't get into the details yet here, but on just kind of confronting the corporate traditional power structures of science and how everyone believes that at face value, and whether especially in the food and agriculture realms, which is definitely more connected to the vaccine and the coronavirus thing than people are willing to admit at first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we hit it off, and just kind of once you're on the same page with this stuff, you kind of realize that everyone's coming to the same conclusions, the same realizations about how our world operates, how these power structures operate. And I don't know why it's not more obvious to other people. That's like my big question now is why are we the special ones? And I'm not like putting a feather in our cap or anything, but like, why is this so obvious to us and other people just can't see it with this stuff, whether it be coronavirus or whatever? Because, this is all happening in real time, right? This virus, and everyone's immediately getting divided up into different camps. And usually in the same family, there's all different camps, right? Which is super funny. Yeah, not always, but usually. And it's really more like a Rorschach test of your previous beliefs on everything else that's going on, vaccines or on everything. And I do think some people are being, for lack of a better term, like red pilled into different thinking with this coronavirus thing. I see a lot more like normies, quote unquote, that are getting way more like, wait, what's going on?
Yeah,
but in
severe
general,
homelessness, poverty will do that to you. When you haven't, with a death rate as low as it is, what I mean? Like that will happen. I mean, it happened to me.
Yeah. And Sarina, I was kind of, I'm like, hey, little Snickers.
There he is.
Yeah, and I was kind of, I was definitely, super skeptical of like the whole Bill Gates agenda and the vaccine that was coming way back in March and April and everything. But I definitely, Sarina was the first one that was really like, hey, are these lockdowns just really working? And I was kind of like, I remember I was kind of like, well, like, I'm definitely pro lockdown, you know, for the 2 weeks, like, let's just do it and get it over with kind of thing. And
2
then you were
weeks.
kind of like, you didn't push me, but you were kind of like, check this out, check that out. And then I went like full on into that. And I'm like, oh,
I
fuck this
remember
shit.
when you hit me up one day, like you were just
Yeah.
like, "Yo, man, nah." Like, like it was like, "Hey, just letting you know, like
Yeah.
this is bullshit." I was like,
And then,
"Hey,
yeah.
I've always deferred to you in these fields." So,
And then, well, then it was the topic of our pod for like 2 weeks straight. I feel
no,
we were just like,
it's
fuck it,
what the
yeah,
pod
it's
is
like,
about. Yeah, no,
yeah, basically,
the
yeah.
entire
It
thing.
came
Yeah.
at we started this shit at the perfect time, but I didn't mean to. I don't know. Go on, Serena. I didn't mean to.
Oh no, you're fine.
Yeah, I
I
was
mean,
like,
I think
yeah,
I answered your question.
yeah.
I just always research everything, and I really, really hate the whole like pro-science, anti-science
Oh.
framing and rhetoric, because science is so much more complex than that. And that to me, and people love to use that terminology now, but that is like a red flag to me to shut down conversation and just not delve into the details, into the data, into the gray areas, which there are many in many scientific issues.
Yeah.
And so and the reason I keep doing what I'm doing now and talking about this issue is because I'm really freaked out about the direction that our public officials are taking things, using bad data, bad analysis, and hype.
So before we get into the vaccine, what are some of the first things that set you off about this whole thing? And you know, we already had a history with, you know, our talking about Bill Gates and his agenda. We can talk about him, and
Let's get to that later. I want to get to the root of this. You know, what I mean? Like the root where we were at from. What was it? March, right? March is when everything really went to shit. So, like, what? I'm sorry, to cut you off, but what?
No, good.
Like, what? Yeah, that March. Take me where you were in March, right? When everything starts going down, most people were kind of like, let's shut down, and it was kind of politicized to where it was like, no, MAGA doesn't want to shut down.
Right.
Good people want to shut down. MAGA wants to shut down. Where's your brain at this moment, like, or at that moment?
It was all over, actually. So originally, even before the shutdown happened, like, you know, March 10th ish, when like I saw it was coming. I kept hearing that various places were shutting down, but it hadn't quite reached us yet. And my first thought, because everyone was spreading the, you know, flatten the curve. This isn't because we're going to try and stop the virus. This is just because we're worried about hospitals getting overwhelmed, you know, just 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And I was actually compelled by that. Like the idea of doing that just for 2 weeks because we needed to flatten the curve. And it wasn't, and because it wasn't framed at that time as trying to stop the virus. It was framed as, we know it's coming, we just don't want to overwhelm hospitals. And so I was kind of on board with that as well. But there were a couple red flags, because when we started shutting down and talking about that, I remember like the first thing I thought about was the measles outbreaks that have been really hyped up the last 2 years. And it confused me, because I connect the hype around the measles outbreaks with an agenda to push vaccines on people. Like there was a clear profit motive to me for why they would hype that disease up and try to make it scarier than I think the data really shows.
What do you mean hype? I'm sorry. It was like, as far as like how I remember it kind of, I don't have children and it wasn't like that. So when you say hype the measles virus, are you saying like skewing data, or is it
like fear mongering that anyone that chooses or has not gotten the MMR vaccine is threatening and killing people because of their choice? In particular, the Orthodox Jewish community in New York City was, I mean, in my view, they had their religious freedom completely taken from them, because New York public health officials were so worried about measles that they were fining or threatening to fine families that allowed their unvaccinated children in public in New York City. And
do you want to rewind just for a quick second and talk about your mom and your history? If not, that's okay. But I mean, I think it's important because people just think you're some crazy
I'm trying
to
clear the anti-vax science denier type thing, because I think we we align with a lot of people, and not a lot of them. I think a lot of people that listen to the show actually are a little more trutherism on COVID and stuff. But with other vaccines, other illnesses, it's still
Yeah.
very much a new thing for a lot of people. So I think
Okay.
as much history as you can go into is good on this.
Okay, so let me rewind then. So this goes back to my mom, who was, like I said, a microbiologist, and she worked for a large multinational pharmaceutical company. And she loves science, right? She used to think that vaccines were literally the greatest medical intervention on the planet. And this was, early 90s. And she had a friend that came to her and was like, "Are you going to vaccinate your kids?" And my mom was like, "Of course." Like, "You're crazy not to." Like, and my mom really believed that this friend was going to be endangering her children. And this friend was also like not a science major, like did something in the arts.
Right.
And my mom, viewed that, like, she's like, "Oh, this is one of those scientifically illiterate people they teach us about." Like, she just doesn't know science. And so my mom decided that it was her duty as a good scientist and citizen to inform her friend of how she was wrong and disprove the claims and things that my mom's friend was saying. And when we say research in the 90s, that isn't Googling or watching YouTube videos. Like, my mom didn't have access to decent internet. It wasn't what it is now. And so she actually went to the medical library at a local university and dug through the primary peer-reviewed published literature on the childhood vaccines that were required at that time. And she was shocked as she looked at the original published literature, and she went through every vaccine individually. Like, they're all different. They all have a different risk-benefit profile. They all have different benefits. They're not just one, that would be like saying all drugs. It's like, it's a huge group.
Right.
And so she went one by one looking at these and realized that many of the claims that her supposedly unscientific friend was saying about some of the risks associated with vaccines were true, and that the peer-reviewed published literature backed her up. And my mom was shocked that never in her life, never in her career, had she ever been informed or told of these things that the scientific literature actually said.
And she was working at a giant, she was in the vaccine industry at a giant multinational
Yeah, I mean,
pharmaceutical
she
company,
wasn't
right?
producing vaccines. She was working in another field. But yeah, she worked for a pharmaceutical company. And
that's
one
like
of
being the Penn State football coach.
One that's everyone, exactly.
Yeah.
A company that everyone's heard of, right? Like, we'll just leave it at that. Everyone's heard of this company, right? And they're okay, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And the other thing that was unique about my mom's job, most people at her level that aren't like, executives in the company are either on the marketing side or they're on the scientific side. And my mom had this special position where she was like sort of a technical salesperson. And so she got to sit in on meetings on the scientific and research side as well as the sales side. And so on the sales side, people are just given their company's science about their products and said, "Oh, go give this to the doctors or your clients or whoever it is you're talking to, and give them this study about how beneficial this drug or this product is." And you're on the marketing side, that's all you see. So you assume that this is, obviously good, legitimate science. And then my mom goes and sits on the scientific side where she hears meetings where people are sitting around saying, "Oh, we have this new product. We really need someone to do a study showing us that, we want these certain outcomes. We want to show X, Y, and Z. Who do you think we can get to do that study for us? We've already written up the design. Oh, I bet this lab over here, they need a new autoclave, or they need new microscopes. I bet if we give them a grant for that, they'll do the study as we've designed it." Yeah. And so she basically saw that they were cooking their own studies to create a certain outcome. And this is what a lot of people don't realize about science. The way science is manipulated, it's not as straightforward like, "Oh, this is a false study," which there is some of that. But it's in how the studies are designed. Like, you can design a study to find certain outcomes or show certain things or not find certain dangers by how long you wait to see certain outcomes or what parameters you're picking and choosing. That's how most science gets biased. It's not like we just straight up faked a study. And so my mom saw a lot of that. So at that time, that kind of led her down the rabbit hole of looking into the stories that were told and the justifications for various vaccines. And so, like, I'll give you one example: whooping cough or pertussis, which we have a vaccine for. A lot of times I have heard, and people have said this, right, that people who aren't getting vaccinated for that are the ones who are leading to all these outbreaks and the resurgence of these vaccine preventable diseases. And yet, if you look in the scientific literature, whether you go back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, there are documented outbreaks in fully vaccinated populations every few years of whooping cough, all over the place. It's not a new thing. And it's really clear from the published literature that the immunity wanes after a couple years. And so most adults, most older teens and children, they have not, like, immunity to whooping cough isn't enough from the vaccine at that point to prevent them from getting it. And yet the hype is, if you're not vaccinated for this, you're the one spreading it. But when you look at the literature, it's completely vaccinated communities that repeatitally have outbreaks of it.
Yeah. As an anecdote, I got whooping cough as a teenager after being fully vaccinated as a child for everything. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And measles too, right? I remember the Canadian communities where there was like 100% vaccination rates and they had huge outbreaks. And they use those outbreaks, the media, as an example of like, this is why you need to vaccinate. And you're like, wait, what the fuck? Like they got vaccinated. This is, and it's and the California and the Disneyland thing was a big one, right? We don't have to go into that, but
it's just, that's when I say hype, I mean, you see public health officials talking like this is the biggest, most important thing. And whooping cough is also not dangerous unless you're like a 6-month-old or under infant. Right. And so that's where when I say hype, I mean this level of panic and fear and danger. Like, this is a dangerous, deadly disease, and it's unvaccinated people that are threatening us, when the reality is very different. And it's either not that dangerous, or the vaccine is also not that beneficial or effective.
Well, that's a good segue into another disease that's being framed as one of the deadliest things that's ever happened to the world. It's consumed the entire year, right? Even the election still feels like it's second. I mean, it was tied to it, honestly. You could say that, but even like a presidential election didn't do that. So let's go back to where we started, right? The lockdowns are happening, right? So with all this stuff that you had, all this experience with your mom and all that kind of stuff like that, what's going through your head when they first start locking down?
Okay, so like I said, I was thinking back to some of the other hype I'd seen around infectious disease, like measles, where I've looked at the data and see that it's really not that dangerous. It used to be considered a mild childhood illness until they developed a vaccine for it and started marketing it as this really, you need to get this vaccine or this is a super deadly disease. And so I had that going through my head, and I was kind of going, our public health officials, in my view, have a history of hyping up the dangers of infectious disease beyond what the data shows. But I paused because I thought, well, we don't currently have a vaccine or a drug for this. So whereas with other things, I can see a little bit more of a profit motive for that hyping, I was like, there's currently no profit motive.
Right,
and so that I paused, and that, really did kind of make me question things. And so my gut reaction was like, lockdown? Like, are you serious? Like, I didn't even know that was a possibility, or that was like in our repertoire of things to deal with an infectious disease. Like, this is really drastic. Yeah. And so I had that going through my head. But then when I looked around and I started looking at alternative news sources, at, Democracy Now!, or like places that I used to go for sort of alternative perspectives on things, right. Everyone was towing the same line. Everyone was treating this really seriously. And so that really threw me. And I was like, maybe I'm missing, like, maybe this is really super serious and different than anything before. And then, of course, when I scrolled through social media, it was just all these horror stories about death and illness and hospitals being overrun.
21-year-old swimmer, professional swimmer. He's the healthiest guy ever per Guinness. And then they're like, he's on a ventilator, and you're like, I can't go outside.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I went back and forth. Like I did have a couple weeks where I was like, wow, okay, I guess, maybe this is warranted to, flatten the curve. Maybe I should be careful. Like I was worried about my parents that are, in their 50s and 60s. And sort of thinking like, oh, should I be going and visiting my parents or but then the other thing that was going on at this time is both of my grandparents were on hospice and very ill, have been, for several years now, multiple chronic illnesses. And they weren't in a nursing home, so I was still able to visit them. And I was very aware, even while we were talking about the lockdowns and all of this, that I was still visiting them and that I knew for at least the one of them that could still clearly communicate, that it was more important for them to see family than be protected from disease. Like they're in their 90s prior to their dying. So I was also thinking like, how much does quality of life matter versus the end of life? And is it really is it worth it to protect someone in their 90s who's already dying or sick if it means like they wouldn't get to see family members or they wouldn't get to have yeah, exactly. So I also had that going through my head because I was living that experience in that time. And my whole family made the collective decision based on my grandparents' current views and what we knew they'd talked about when they were more cognitively aware, that they would have wanted us to keep visiting. And my parents were their, some of their main care because they weren't in a nursing home, that they would have clearly chosen that over being protected from this disease. And so that was also making me think, even while I was taking the disease seriously, it was still like those questions of mortality and questions of quality of life versus length of life and what is most important. And I started to feel like that I didn't like that it was the government making that universal decision for everyone about which one mattered more.
Boom.
And so that kind of led me down this rabbit hole. And then as time went on, I finally started finding those people and those doctors and those voices that I'd been looking for, but hadn't seen anyone covering an alternative perspective. I started reading the data. I started hearing, more information. And that, that brought me up to like about end of April-ish. So by the time I got to the end of April or May, I was much less fearful and I was really feeling like, I wasn't as worried about this personally. I didn't think that it was, I was trying to let go of the fear that just from the things I had been seeing, I had picked up. And both of my grandparents died during the spring and summer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not from COVID. But I knew that by visiting them and the possibility of bringing COVID to them, they could have died from that. But it was like,
no, but they wouldn't have wanted it any other way. I mean, like,
they wouldn't have wanted any other way. And it was like a common cold or the flu could have killed them just as much. Like we were just as worried about that as anything else.
Literally a nurse error, like, you know what I mean? Like just something like no, I lost my grandfather during that time too, right around the beginning, almost the same time. And it was a slow, gradual process. So, I mean, very, very peaceful and stuff like that. But it was just like anything could have happened at that moment. Like seriously, a trip to the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not trying to be like, make it a trip to the bathroom could have been a wrap. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying it in a sense like, well, old people don't matter. I truly disagree. But if you talk to any old person, when it was time for the lockdowns, I was very much like, let's lock down. This could get crazy. But every old person I talk to, they're like, do not lose your job for me.
Yeah.
Do not. No, I've seen the Great Depression. I've literally saw it with my eyes. Like, you know what I mean? I've seen sessions, all that kind of stuff. Do not do this for me. You know what I mean? That's not the way life works. You know what I mean? like, you know what I mean? Like, it's literally the end of my life. It should be like the prime of yours.
And I know tons of normie families that have like a grandparent and they're all hella sad. They're like this, and that's what I'm saying. There's a schism. It's kind of working its way in there where it's like, this isn't healthy for anyone, especially the old people involved.
Well, and I know
it's like they're dying in fear and in loneliness right now, right? Go on. Yeah.
Well, and like I had friends and other people that had family in nursing homes where they, because of the nursing home policies, were literally not allowed to see them. And I was like, that would have been terrible to have some outside force not allowing us to visit or be connected with them in their last weeks. And so I did think, and I still feel that a lot of the nursing home policies are really wrong and problematic in many ways. And they're more about liability for the nursing home than they are about what the residents in the nursing home
it's a business.
actually want.
Yeah, it's a business.
But I mean, and then the other thing that was also influencing this was when they died and we had to have funerals with, less than 10 people outdoors. And I never imagined that that's the way it would be, that we wouldn't get to have our relatives and extended family come in and do. And I'm Jewish, and so like the traditional sitting a shiva and
I haven't heard of that tradition, but I'm just kidding.
sharing food.
That's okay. I respect it though. Yeah.
And Jews, these things, So. Yeah. And like I was definitely aware the toll that took on my mom to not be able to have the support of friends and family that she normally would have during that time.
And also just the fact that people couldn't do the funeral thing.
Yeah, we still haven't had one. Yeah, for my grandfather.
At the same time that these that this crazy civil unrest is going on and the George Floyd thing, which we're all down for here. It's not like an anti-protest thing, but just the hypocrisy of it.
That should have been a step in the right direction.
Exactly.
Data-wise, like that should have been, right? Because that was when I turned. Like that was when I was like, no. Great. It should say when it said MSNBC, this did not show a huge spread of the virus, which I disagree with. It probably did, but I'm just saying, like, if it is what it is. I was like, cool, outdoor concerts, they're back. We can do school outdoors. We can do all types of stuff outdoors. A lot of our jobs could be worked outdoors. Like a lot of stuff can happen, right? That we can get back going, get the economy back going.
And then next week, they're like,
nope. Kidding me? Like, look at that 38-person Trump rally. Like, can't do that.
I think that's more significant than people realize. I think that for normal people saw that, not like people online or Twitter. They're just like, wait, what the fuck is going on? And there's people, they have so sad videos of like, people at a funeral in masks being separated like 12 feet apart, and then the son like tries to hug their mom, and like the owner of the funeral home's like, no, you fucking get him, and it's like, and then
what's like, sad was you watching funeral videos.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what's sad. I'm just kidding.
I've been in a dark hole, you guys.
It's like I think that all your related videos on YouTube.
My
your algorithm is just ruined.
It's fucked.
But
No,
anyway.
I think that was the big one for me, where I was just like, and the whole like, but they were wearing masks, and it's like, okay, so masks are cool. We just open everything back up, and it's just
that's
dumb.
Exactly.
It was so dumb. Yeah.
When people ask me, what do you like? So what do you want? Just free for all, everyone die? No, I'll wear a mask. I have no problem. I'll wear a mask. I'll wash my hands. Let me just do what I want to do. Let me do what I want to do. Let other people do what they want to do. If other people say, hey, we should stay inside, most of those people make money working at home. That was kind of a thing I looked at. They're like, hey, stay inside. Why is everyone doing things? Like, no, you're going to be fine. You can stay inside. I want to go outside. You know what I mean? Like, it's literally like, you hear all this shit, and it's like, I don't want to sound like some conservative freak, because I'm not. I'm like quite the opposite. But like, you know what I mean? Like where the freedom this, freedom that. No, but it is. I'll wear the mask. I don't really push back on the masks. You know what I mean? I'm not like, oh, well, I have to wear this. No, if you let me do what I need to do, I think that's a fair compromise. It's PPE. Sure. Businesses have rights to say you have to wear this to walk, like, so where, I guess what I'm saying is, as far as the data shows, right? So when you see the data, and we talk about it here and there, and we stuff. So what did you see in the data that was like, wait, this isn't doing what they're saying? It's doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, the main thing, and this is what I feel like I'm really good at, is picking out inconsistencies. Before I can figure out like what the real story is, I can see where the official story like really doesn't add up. And there were just so many holes so quickly, like either does this work or doesn't this work? And is the death rate this or is it not? And like early on, when they were claiming the death rate was, 8% or whatever, testing was extremely limited. And you heard people talking about like, oh, don't get tested. We're only testing like the sickest people. Here's the requirements for you to even get a test. And while at the same time saying that like, yeah, there's asymptomatic cases, they're like spreading this all over the place. And so I was like, if there's all these people that are asymptomatic, then this isn't the real case fatality rate. Like there's got to be a million more cases than what you're testing out there. And it's really skewing the case fatality rate much higher if you're only testing the sickest individuals and the ones that are most likely to die. And so like early on, that was kind of a red flag to me. When I saw it was
and
going
all
on
the
with
models
testing.
were based on that. All the decisions were based on that.
And then the model, oh my goodness. Yeah. So the model that like led to the world shutting down was this Imperial College London model from a professor, Neil Ferguson. And it was not, for as much as like the people that call themselves pro-science love to talk about peer review and how important it is, this paper was not peer reviewed or published originally at all. It was literally just like this research that was given to the UK government. And no one double checked the model. And it predicted that if we didn't do anything in the US, we would have like 2.2 million deaths. And when other people were like, hey, can we see your code for the algorithms that you ran this model on? The professor was like, no, most people wouldn't understand it. Like it's really complex and it's this old shitty code. And people were like, other people know how to read code. Like there are people that could analyze
it.
He literally was like,
I've used that excuse so many times. Yeah, no, like I should go to the Imperial College of London, which is the scariest university name I've ever heard in my life. Maybe I might add, like, what the fuck is that?
So this is the paper. Like I had friends that were literally sharing this paper, being like, everyone read the science. This is 2.2 million people are gonna die. And then I start hearing that people are requesting the code on this non-peer-reviewed paper so they can like double check it.
I'm sorry, when you say the code, like, I got to ask a dumb guy question here. When you say the code, like, and that's just how you navigate within, or is that like a
that's a good question. Why is code
I honestly don't know. I'm like
modeling paper?
I'm over here like code, the code. Like I'm not.
Why is computer science factoring into this? Like
because it's a model.
Question. Yeah.
So he used, and I don't remember all the details of this. I think it was actually an outdated model that had been used. This guy in particular likes to predict lots of diseases are a lot more deadly than they actually are. He's been wrong on like 3 different previous diseases with his models, actually.
It's on a streak, sure. Yeah.
Foot and mouth disease, the, what is it called? The like human variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob, or like mad cow disease, the like early onset, like really dangerous one that everyone was freaking out about.
That's a throwback. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. So this is the guy that predicted that there'd be like a ton of deaths from like both of those diseases, and it never came true at all. Like just blatantly, his models were wrong. Like he has a history of like over exaggerating stuff. And so he took one of those models and then kind of revamped it to predict COVID deaths. And there were different variables like how much people move, how infectious the disease is, how, whether asymptomatic people spread it or not, different points of contact. And so, and I am not a computer science person, but my understanding is that to create this model and predict how many people would die or be infected, he was using a computer code to generate the model.
So he's like Nate Silver, basically. He's just wrong. Like, and I got it. That perfect. That's like, okay.
So that's why other people
wanted
saying. The code, so they could be like, well, what were you doing to use these endpoints to get this outcome? Like how, what were you, running or how, what is the model is basically what people wanted to know. And he was he
didn't want to give it up for a couple of weeks.
For I think 2 months, he didn't give it up.
Yeah.
You want the model? Yeah, he's like,
Well, then it gets worse. Yeah. So then
she wants the model. Yeah. You look at this, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
The model.
Yeah. So then he's like, after being pressured repeatedly, and a lot of this happened on Twitter, I think.
Yeah. God bless.
He finally was like, okay, we are working, since it's really old, shitty code that's like really bad, we need to work with someone to update it before we can release it. Guess who he partners with to update it? Microsoft.
Oh, God.
Let's go.
So,
William. Yeah. God.
Yeah.
All right. I love it. Gates time. Hello.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Need an air
then
horn for that.
Yeah.
he and Microsoft supposedly partner, and I'm like, again, why can't you just release the original code? Like, I don't understand why you need to update it and change it with Microsoft before you release it. Anyway, he did that. Finally, he releases it. Even after he releases the supposedly updated version from Microsoft, all of these other computer scientists literally go in and tear the code to shreds and are like, this is the shittiest code I've ever seen in my life, and you could run this model 10 times and get 10 different results. Like, it was, there were no...
Who are these scientists? Like, are they like from... Are they all from like alternative sources? Or are they from like other kind of
just like Twitter bros, that like scientists that are like, yo, I just want to know what's going right. Kind
yeah,
my boy,
I think it was
they're
a bunch
real
of random computer
yeah.
scientists. And I mean, some of their commentary and articles got published somewhere. I don't remember where, but it was like very public, like their names attached to it. Like,
got it. Okay.
These were people that like, I think I don't know code, so this wasn't something I could analyze.
Right.
But it was a continuous stream of like people point by point saying like, oh, well, there's this problem in the code. Like, why did he just leave out this endpoint and he left out this variable? And there's no like feedback loop to double check that the algorithm isn't just like in, generating this in random error, that it's actually, you'd get the same result every time. Like, stuff that I really don't understand. But
but they ripped it up.
They ripped it up. Like, multiple people were just that I saw, and I shared this with some people, and they were like, oh yeah, like I think that is, shitty code. And so after it was supposedly made better, then it's like basically so bad that people are saying you could get different numbers every time you run this. And that is what that is what governments use to decide how dangerous this was going to be, and that it was worth shutting the world down over.
Yeah.
Damn.
And also more generally, I know that's a specific example, but just these when people model this stuff in general with infections, and oftentimes they don't take into account that they kind of do this whole anyone can infect everyone all over the world thing, and every vector is like a thing, without realizing that when you hear like the famous thing on like Twitter now is to be like, if you do the math, like 1% of 300 million or 2% of 300 million is 6 million people. 6 million people could die. Are you cool with that, bro? And it's like, that fails to account for that. We're not all going to interact with each other that way. That's not how viruses work. They burn out. They get into little segments. There are huge roadblocks to this thing ever taking off like that, like a true pandemic, right? And
well, look at
that's
the
never
flu.
factored into. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
not everyone gets the flu every year.
Yeah, no. And the whole thing is I feel like we would know if we wouldn't have to hype this up. We wouldn't if this thing was more serious than it. Yeah. If this thing was as serious as it should have, it required all these lockdowns, everything, we would have just been doing it. If we knew like friends that were dying all over the place. I'm not saying a small minority.
No, there are people. I'm not even denying that there are. I'm not one of those people that's like, we sure that body's real in the picture? Like, I'm not one of those guys. Like, I'm totally. I totally can understand. We're like the unhealthiest first world country. Like people are going to die from a lot of shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's pneumonia deaths of people way younger than, 50 years old, or like, there's people dying in their 40s from pneumonia. It sucks. Like, we do not take care of ourselves here. I think we all could agree with that. So that was another thing. And you don't see the mention of like, here's how to take care of yourself. Like, not
that was
preventative health. You don't see that. It's like
zero mention.
Yeah. It's like, no, take a shower in Purell, like sit in your house, stream TV all day, eat Postmates, which you'll never order anything healthy from. I never do. I'm gonna eat healthy on Postmates and DoorDash today. No, I never do. So there's all this stuff, but you never saw any mention of preventative health. Like I was messed up to me.
Oh yeah. Well, and that was definitely, I'd say, the other tip off is I see all this stuff being about, this is all about saving lives. Like, to this day, still, there was a short period in April where the number of daily deaths from COVID exceeded those from heart disease, but on average, they're still way lower. Heart disease is our number one killer in the United States. And we 100% know that the majority of heart disease is preventable and even reversible with a whole foods plant-based diet. And we also know that obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are the biggest factors that make people more prone to dying from COVID. So put those two together. If our public health officials really were driven by saving lives, then why aren't they on every TV talking about diet and exercise? And why are all the fast food restaurants still open, but those little mom and pop, local restaurants, they aren't? Why are the alcohol stores all open? Why are alcohol sales going up? And all of this?
Hey, let's chill. I was with you to. No, I'm kidding.
All right, this pod is over.
First you came for the fast food, then you came for the
But yeah,
vitamin D and
vitamin D is huge.
Yep.
Literally the sun.
When there's multiple studies showing a near 100% efficacy rate that you won't die of COVID if you have sufficient vitamin D, and if you don't, then you're fucked. You're gonna be one of those 80% that will. Yep. And it's just, and I think the vitamin D thing is a big one. That's my big conspiracy is that if we allow vitamin D sufficiency in our population, it would save trillions of dollars in healthcare procedures all over the world, but especially in America. And it would extend our life an average of 5 to 10 years, probably. If we never had a vitamin D deficiency in the West, basically, right? Mm-hmm. And we could. It would be a cascade of positive benefits, and it would end so much profit from the healthcare and health insurance industries. It'd be insane, and it costs what, like $5 a year, $10 a year,
And just being in the sun helps.
Yeah,
too.
totally.
It's literally like this is the first era in human history where it's like, hey, you should go outside.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Nobody else is like, everybody else back then, it's like, what do you mean I am outside?
Exactly.
We're having this conversation outside. But like nowadays it's like, hey, step away from all that stuff. But no, it was the lockdowns. And that was another thing I started thinking about was the lockdowns. Like, okay, what's the best way for nobody to go outside, get the nutrients they need from the sun, that everybody's been getting for a while. And like I said, just eating unhealthy, staying inside, just wrecking your immune system. Over sanitizing, over just all that kind of stuff where, and I was doing it for a while. I'm not going to lie, but it's nuts. And I'll answer your question. I guarantee you it's all profit based, right? You know what I mean? You cannot profit off the sun for now. You know what I mean? You can't profit off the $5. I guess you could, if you could gouge the price on it, but they haven't done that. And you mentioned you mentioned Bill Gates, and can we get into Mr. William Gates for a second?
We're big. We talk about him a lot on this.
Look, I'll guarantee you a lot of people that listen to this show, right, are billionaire, anti-wealth hoarding and stuff. So the problem with Bill Gates for a lot of people was his Epstein ties and the just the fact that he's a crook, you know what I mean? And he just has a bunch of money, and he funnels it through a lot of like nonprofit, NGO kind of stuff like that. But in the vaccine industry, what can you tell us about Bill Gates?
Ooh. So I actually knew more before I connected Bill Gates to the vaccine thing. I didn't like him because of like stuff that when I was in Ithaca, I actually learned and heard about what was going on in Cornell and GMOs. Like that was my first introduction as an adult into the problems with a lot of Bill Gates philanthropy.
Him funding $5, $10, $15 million worth of propaganda of African agriculture.
And what I knew about that. And so it's very, very similar. Like he is very technologically reductionist and driven in his approach to helping things. And I noticed something really interesting actually, which is a while back, climate change and climate activism didn't used to be as accepted in the mainstream and scientific world as it is today.
Right.
And I noticed that a lot of people became really big Bill Gates fans in the last 5 years or so when he started, really talking about climate change, investing in plant-based meat companies, and all these people are jumping on board thinking he's great. And I remember thinking, what has changed that he is talking about climate change, and that all these billionaires and privileged, very wealthy elite are super like that, like climate change has now entered the acceptable, non-fringe, like pro-science mainstream narrative. And that's when I realized that this is my take from what I've read on why Bill Gates is probably, supporting that now, is because he's heavily invested in geoengineering, data collection, seed collection, like all of this stuff where he can profit off of the solution to supposed climate change, shooting particles into the air to block the sun, rather than addressing the root causes of climate change. And when he started talking about this back in 2015, his foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, was still invested in a bunch of fossil fuel companies. And he criticized divestment as ineffective and a bad strategy at that time. That should tell you, everything you need to know. And so then when I started looking into his involvement in vaccines and the fact that public health is one of his big initiatives, he's now aside from the US, the top donor to the World Health Organization, an individual is the top donor to the World Health Organization. So that's
he
gotta
runs
be
it. He runs
That's
it.
literally like a Batman plot. You know what I mean? It's this guy Gates. He's funding everything, and that's bad. Yeah, you know what I mean, that's the premise of the show. But I guess it's good now. In the thing.
And so and he has gotten into multiple legal battles with the Indian government, and
over polio vaccine
over
stuff, right?
So the polio vaccine is one that he pushes a lot. And here's the thing, this is just kind of taking a step back for people that maybe, I don't know if there's any listening, but that still think Bill Gates is a better billionaire than others because he's this great philanthropist.
There's a few probably,
all of these, I've heard that from a lot of people, he's different because he gives all this money away and he cares. And my thing is this: he has enough money that if he really wanted to get rid of world hunger or poverty in some of the countries that he operates in, he could do it with the money he has, no question. And he isn't he's choosing to focus on drugs and interventions and GMOs rather than giving people running water and good sanitation and hygiene, more basic and helpful things that could actually eradicate these problems more effectively. So that's kind of my big picture take that makes me very skeptical about what he does. But one of the big
destroys the narrative too. If you give people running water and all these diseases disappear, right? And then you're like, wait, we're good on that. We don't need the oral polio vaccine anymore.
Teach a man to running water. Give a man the running. That's saying.
You bring a horse to running water.
But so one of the things he's really pushed is the oral polio vaccine, which for reference, we do not use in the United States anymore because it was deemed too dangerous.
Why? What was that? What was happening with that? Sorry.
So the oral polio vaccine, and I actually, from the science I've read, I actually think the oral polio vaccine is fairly effective. It just is much higher risk, whereas the killed polio vaccine, I think, is much less effective, comes with less risk in some ways. But because the oral polio vaccine is a live virus vaccine, it has this risk of the virus mutating back to a more dangerous strain and giving people polio from the vaccine. It's called vaccine strain polio.
It gives people polio.
Because it's a
live
we don't know
virus. Everything about it. He's a good guy.
Dude.
So we have discontinued it in the US because of that risk and danger, but it's much, much cheaper, and it's an oral, it's just a pill you take rather than a shot. So it's much cheaper and easier to distribute in other countries that don't have the medical infrastructure that we have. And so the Gates Foundation has heavily distributed and pushed the oral polio vaccine in India. And in many cases, there have been more cases of vaccine strain polio than there have been wild type polio.
I remember for years, this information was out there and you would talk about it and people would call you crazy. And then all of a sudden the Indian government's suing Bill Gates. And you're like, oh, wait, this is actually happening. It's actually maiming kids in India. Right?
Yeah.
And the medical ethics of
people.
They're caught fucking forging signatures of illiterate kids. They're like, yeah, I consent to this vaccine. And it's there's all sorts of crazy shit going on with that, and not just in India too, but especially in India.
And is there something with sterilization? Like, where are you with the sterilization thing? Like, is that a thing? Is that just like a kind of crazy guy talk, or is that?
I'll just jump in. You probably have more to say on this, but I know that for sure what we know at a bare minimum, not even talking about Gates, but just the pharmaceutical companies that do experimental vaccines, especially in Latin America, on pregnant women or just women in general. And even if they have the best of intentions, that has led to women being sterilized by experimental vaccines. Even with the best of intentions, that outcome has occurred by running experimental vaccine trials on poor third world global south women, basically, right? Is that fair to say?
I mean, and I will say, like, I like all this stuff, but like I said, like, I come from very scientific perspective, so I hesitate to go. I mean, I love discussing conspiracy theories, but like, my perspective for some people is actually much more middle of the road and not as radical as some people I know. And so, like, that said, I see these claims about, like, Bill Gates wants to sterilize all of us. And in particular, I see this excerpt from like a 2015 TED talk he gave where he mentions, you know, like, with vaccines and with this, you know, we can help bring the world population down. And I've seen a lot of people take that out of context and, like,
smoking gun.
Oh, Bill Gates wants to, you know, he's admitting openly on the TED talk stage that he's trying to sterilize people and reduce the world population with vaccines. And because of my knowledge in the science world, I know that is not what he meant at all. And the idea behind that is, if more children get vaccinated and live to adulthood more and infectious disease isn't as big of an issue, families start having fewer children. Like, he was coming at it from that perspective.
Try to replace the ones that are sick. Is that what you were saying? Like, families would have more children because the other ones got sick, right? Because they were not
like,
vaccinated.
it's pretty well documented that when the childhood mortality rate declines, families have fewer children. Like, that's a pretty universal trend in a lot of developing and developed nations. So I know that that's probably what he meant. I do not believe, whatever I think about his intentions, that he would be stupid enough to openly say on a TED Talk stage, like, we're for sterilizing people with vaccines. And so I don't like when that stuff gets taken out of context, because then from my perspective, that makes some of the things I say, I get lumped in with people making those claims and seen as less credible. So I don't know, like, I don't talk a lot or know a whole lot about the legitimacy. Yes, are experimental accidental things happening? Absolutely. Is there some intention? I haven't seen decent enough evidence to claim anything about intentionally sterilizing people with vaccines.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad that you're able, like, because I think some people listening could just be like, oh, she's just gonna agree with any conspiracy theory, you know what I mean? Because she's on this thing, and that's good. Because I didn't know. I keep seeing that thing, and that's kind of like the like, I'm in construction, right? So the construction guy, Jerry, Bill Gates doesn't want anyone to have kids. You know what I mean? The guy comes up to you, "Did you hear that shit, dude?" I'm just like, well, yeah, but, you know, I don't know, you know, and I don't, and you can't just, like, you know, throw anything at, like, a, you know, thing, a big roll, and there's like, gum and everything sticks to it. Like, you're just like, all right, you know, like, maybe not everything is true, that the claims, and it does like, lump you in with Alex Jones, or, you know, like, Sandy Hook isn't real, you know, like that type of thing. It does, because anti-vax already has that narrative of just like, oh no, they're a psycho, they're like, they don't have electricity in their house.
But that's a psyop in and of itself, you know?
Exactly.
And the
but
thing
I'm
is,
saying,
like,
it's easy to do that when you do have something that is wrong, right? Like with COVID, there were people that are saying, oh, it's a hoax, right? It's not a hoax. You know, I mean, nobody thinks it's a hoax. Most people don't think it's a hoax, but there were a few people that kind of did say that early, and then anything you say that's disputing the data, the models, anything like that, no, they think it's a hoax. That's MAGA, that's Trump, you know, or whatever, you know. So it's good that you know, are able to at least.
I think a lot of that stuff's controlled opposition, you know. They put that shit out. And,
no, 1,000% manufactured consent.
It's also the weakest Bill Gates conspiracy. There's so much other crazy fucking shit that he's doing that's so much more we're able to criticize. Yeah, I 100% agree. And the craziest thing for me is, why is this guy the health czar of the world?
Yes. Why is one of the richest guys in the world is like the health expert?
Well, it's, and the other thing that people don't realize is, this really scares me too, is I think he is so powerful and he has used his money. Like, he's clearly really smart, whether, like wise or whatever. I don't know his intentions, but like he's
got a lot of
clearly
raw intelligence for sure.
He has a lot of raw intelligence. Like, I believe that. And one of the ways I can see that is when you look at early videos of how he was perceived with the antitrust lawsuits around Microsoft.
Right.
And then how, like, overnight he started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, now is this guy that wears sweaters and is like everyone's favorite philanthropist.
Yeah.
Like, he knew how to work PR. And I saw this article that came out in the Columbia Journalism Review, I think, sometime this year, that was one of the best investigative journalistic pieces about the Gates Foundation that I've seen in a while. And it was looking at how the Gates Foundation influences media coverage of Gates Foundation programs.
Oh, yeah.
So what was that about? If you could just go into it a little bit.
Yeah. So basically it documented how he gives, whether directly or indirectly via another nonprofit or something, to media companies like NPR, I know NPR was definitely one of them, probably the New York Times, but he gives a lot of funding.
Thank you for the money, Bill Gates. I appreciate
it. Independent media companies. And then when you look at their coverage of Gates Foundation programs, particularly in the public health sphere around vaccines or around GMOs and food and agriculture, they are glowingly positive. And you look at who they cite as their sources. And this article that I read in the Columbia Journalism Review pointed out, like, I think it was a literal NPR piece where they showed that there were no outside sources cited except Gates Foundation officials about the Gates Foundation program.
Right
like, they didn't get a third party. They didn't get like someone in that African country to talk about it was just Gates Foundation officials being like, our programs are working great. And NPR then publishes this, and it presents this completely positive impression of all the Gates Foundation work. And to try and find negative published articles about the Gates Foundation is incredibly difficult. And then when you realize how much money the Gates Foundation is giving to supposed independent media sources, and then the media that they put out, I mean, that just really freaks me out. That shows me, like, this guy and his efforts, he's brilliant, and he knows how to manipulate public appearance like nobody else.
He literally goes on CNN like as a medical expert. It's insane. Like, he'll just be like on Anderson Cooper, and then he'll be on Chris Cuomo later in the day, and it's like he'll just go on there and be like, yeah, well, it's going to be tough to get the virus out to everybody, and it's like, I was just watching videos of him today where he's already talking about the vaccine coming out. Like, he's already talking with Anderson Cooper about it, and he's just like, yeah, we got to find out who the sickest ones are, who all this is now. And segueing all this Bill Gates stuff into this current COVID vaccine, right? That's under thing. Obviously we know the Bill Gates aspect is scary, but like, as far as just the vaccine itself, what are you skeptical of?
So I probably wouldn't be so skeptical if I wasn't worried about these vaccines being made mandatory in many ways. And that is the reason that I do speak up about this issue. Like, if it was really like with other medical interventions, like, you do you, I'm going to do me. If you think, the vaccine is worth the risk and you want to take it, like, great. But it really freaks me out that we have created this narrative where other people think that, and this is the problem that I see even around the mask and lockdown mandate, is that perfectly healthy individuals that are living their lives are being blamed with literally killing other people.
Yeah.
And it's the same rhetoric around vaccines. And it's like, if you don't get a vaccine, you are putting other people at risk, or you're killing people. And I find that extremely problematic, because vaccines are unlike any other medical procedure that exists on the planet. They are the only medical intervention, and they are a medical intervention that carries risks and benefits, as with any, but they're the only one that's literally given preventatively to perfectly healthy individuals. So to me, the risks that you're willing to take, like, it has to be a much safer technology than many other interventions, because if you're already sick or dying of cancer or have heart disease and need, surgery, like, you're already sick and likely willing to take a bigger risk to accept a greater, outcome. But when you're giving an intervention like a vaccine to perfectly healthy children, adults, like whole communities, you better be damn sure that that isn't going to be harming, a decently large number of individuals. And so for me, I am extremely worried that the rhetoric I'm seeing is, if you want to travel in the future, if you want to get a job, if you want to go to school, if you want to get on a plane, if you want to enter other countries, like, you're going to have to get this vaccine. And that goes against informed consent, which after the Nuremberg Convention and the trials of Nazi doctors, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written that said, for all medical experimentation, testing, interventions, people have the right to informed consent and the right to accept or reject any medical intervention. And mandatory vaccine policies are not informed consent. They are coercion. They're like, if the only way you can work or participate in society is getting a shot, that's not informed consent. That is not freely being able to decide whether you want to accept those risks.
So what is their narrative that everyone, and I'm not saying this from like a profit, because I obviously understand the business side of everybody getting a vaccine.
Right.
But when you hear people say, look, if everybody doesn't get it, then this doesn't work, right? I always hear that. And what is the science behind that?
Yeah, so the claim is herd immunity, right? And the herd immunity thing is very fascinating. And to be clear, I'm not an expert on herd immunity, but my understanding is that herd immunity was this idea that was originally derived from looking at natural infections, not vaccines, but that when we looked at epidemics and outbreaks of disease, we noticed that in a particular community, if there was a certain percentage of people that had already gotten the disease in a previous year or were already immune, that even if a little outbreak occurred or a few people got sick, the illness wouldn't spread widely because there was kind of this buffer or herd immunity, because there was a high enough percentage of people in the population that had immunity that they kind of blocked the quick passage of that disease to other people. So that is where the idea of herd immunity originated. And somehow that got translated to vaccines. And it was basically decided that, and the really interesting thing is this is all model based. Like, this is not something that we've actually researched currently with any vaccines or have proof of. It's completely based on these mathematical models of how many people need to be vaccinated. And the models used to be set at like, we need like 80% coverage for herd immunity. And then they kept seeing outbreaks in fully vaccinated populations, whether it was whooping cough or measles or these other, mumps, like things that were happening. And they'd go, okay, I guess 80% isn't high enough. And they'd rework the model and they'd be like, so you need like 90% for herd immunity now. And then there would still be outbreaks in these fully, in 90% vaccinated populations. They'd be like, herd immunity is 95%. So the numbers have just kept going up and up of the supposed amount we need to be vaccinated. And if you're getting up to 100% of people needing to be vaccinated, that's not herd immunity. Then you're basically saying the vaccine doesn't work well enough unless everybody is vaccinated.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and then, the idea is like,
or it doesn't work even with 100% and it still happens. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Work.
What happens
Exactly.
then? What happens then if we all consent, right? Because Ticketmaster, right? I have tickets to a Ticketmaster conference. Right? That was canceled. Ticketmaster said, hey, we need either proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. Now,
terrifying.
Personally, to me, I'd probably do the negative COVID test.
Yeah.
Just personally, I got within 72 hours. They released that. So if I get that, right, and if I'm like, you know what, say I did say, let's just get the vaccine. Let's do it. Let's do it. And we get 100% immunity. What do you like? What would happen, right? Because like we see the profits would happen, but what would happen, right? If it's like, hey, does it not work? Like, where are we at then, right? Like,
I think that is absolutely here's my prediction, actually. So I'll just tell you, I think based on the natural history of other infectious diseases, such as the 1918 flu epidemic, a lot of outbreaks, epidemics, pandemics have taken about 2 years to resolve on their own, where either enough of the population gets immunity or people die off or the virus mutates and it isn't the same anymore. But 2 years is a normal time frame. I think that at about the 2-year mark is when we will have finally probably rolled out the vaccine to a very large number of people. and they're going to take credit that the COVID is going to disappear and not be a thing. And it's going to fit the narrative of, look, you know, our vaccine eradicated another illness, when it's totally correlation, not causation. It will probably never be proven, because the current vaccine trials that I've seen aren't even looking to see if they actually prevent illness. Most of them, the way they're designed, they're literally not looking to see if the vaccine prevents death, which you'd think that would be the number one thing we'd want to know if the vaccine prevents, since that's what
I'd prefer not to die personally.
Right. No, the trials are not looking at deaths. They're not looking at hospitalizations. Literally, like there was a Forbes article about the design of these vaccine trials and the outcomes that they are measuring. They were measuring mild COVID illness. They were like testing whether people got sniffles and coughs. Yeah. What is the point of a vaccine that maybe prevents sniffles and coughs, but doesn't prevent infection, doesn't reduce deaths, and doesn't reduce hospitalizations?
And the people that are susceptible for those things you just said, if they're not looking for those results, they're not going to find them, right? They're not going to. But I wanted to ask, okay, yeah, so the design of these studies is crazy. You probably know more about it than I do. But this number creep of, two things. That we've never, I guess it's all connected, that we've never been able to successfully vaccinate against a coronavirus in human history before. Mm-hmm. Even the flu, which is not a coronavirus, but semi kind of in the same ballpark related, we don't, they claim we have an effective vaccine for the flu, and we don't, right? We don't.
The side effect of the vaccine is the flu.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and yeah, and it's so there's that, you know, and there's so much variance every year to year with the mutation and everything with that. That's a whole other story. And on top of that, that this is a brand new technology, mRNA vaccine that's never before been used in human history. And they're claiming a 90% success rate, and then a week later they say it's 95%, and then like it's 97%, and like what the fuck's up with that? You know, like walk us through that with
grade on a curve.
So where to start first? So first of all, flu vaccine is a very good example of hype around this issue. Like they're pushing the flu vaccine like never before right now because of this twindemic of like, we don't want flu cases and COVID at the same time. But the reality is, when there are meta-analyses, and every year the Cochrane Foundation, one of the foremost independent scientific collaborations around the world, very highly respected, they have done this meta-analysis of all of the flu vaccine trials and studies. And almost every year that they do this analysis of the flu vaccine, they've repeatedly found that the vaccine has negligible impact on hospitalizations and negligible impact on death and sickness and lost working days. Mm-hmm. So that right there, and when I say negligible, like from a public health perspective, I have heard people claim that like it's a relative risk reduction of like 50%. But that means when you look at the actual numbers, if you don't get the vaccine, your risk of getting the influenza is like, and I'm not gonna remember the exact numbers, but I think it's around like 2%. And if you get the vaccine, your absolute risk of getting influenza is about 1%. So they will highlight that, you know, like that double risk for not getting the vaccine, the 2% versus the 1%. They'll be like, you have half the risk if you get the vaccine. Like, this is how effective it is. But if you look at those absolute numbers, like, oh, so my risk without the vaccine is 2% and my risk with the vaccine is 1%. Like,
and that's at the best of years. That's the best case scenario.
And it's
often a lot less than that. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then you take into account that the flu vaccine is one of the most the vaccine that has the most payouts and claims for injuries right now under the federal vaccine compensation program. Like multiple people, many people, like millions of dollars have been paid out in injuries to the flu vaccine in particular. So when you look at the risks and harms people are getting from the flu vaccine with this very limited risk reduction that has very little impact on lost working days, it's incredibly ineffective, and yet it is pushed like nothing else, you know?
Right. Signs at Walgreens on the outside. Yeah, it's nuts.
And and just for the record, there are many, many doctors that would identify as being pro-vaccine and support and push many other vaccines that all think the flu vaccine is a sham.
Yeah, which is
So,
crazy. That's the thing. That's the key, because if it's so important to understand that there are normal people that go to med school that are not down with the flu vaccine, for one example. Right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's why I think there's going to be, in spite of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to, I know I've like, I don't know personally, but I follow people online and I see people, there's so many people that are like normies, whether they're med school students or doctors or whatever, that are like, wait, what? We're doing this vaccine, this brand new thing. I think it's going to red pill a lot of people they're
they're not going to get the consent that I think there's a lot of people that will, especially people that have been watching CNN election wise all year, right?
Yeah.
Like those people, they've already signed in. They're tapping their veins. Like, let's go, but I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people, like I talk to a lot of people like at my work, and it's just kind of like blue collar and stuff. And they're just like, nah. Like we work outside. It's not gonna happen. So
but also, what's the risk? Like, because we've talked about this on this pod before, of that every pandemic with a rushed vaccine has led to pretty dramatic unintended consequences. that often last for life for people, like the H1N1 with the British nurses who have permanent narcolepsy now, and
swine flu, the
swine
swine
flu
flu vaccine.
Yeah, it's like and those were like none of those had the media hype that COVID has now, where everyone. So if there is even a small percentage of people that are going to get fucked up from this vaccine, it could be millions of people, and it could be a huge deal, and it could backfire, is what I'm saying, on whatever program they're trying to implement on us.
Right.
Well,
that's the thing. You have to compare the risk of the disease with the risk of the vaccine. So we don't know, and we won't know for a while, what the severe side effects probably really are of this vaccine. But when you have people like Bill Gates or, Fauci coming out and saying we need to get 7 billion vaccines out to the whole world. If you are giving 7 billion vaccines out and you have even a 0.1%, even if 1 out of 1,000 people or 1 out of 1 million people have a severe injury or disability from the vaccine, that's an incredible amount of people that you have now harmed from your medical intervention. And you have to compare that to if we didn't do anything, how many people would be harmed just by the virus.
Yeah. And those same people are pushing that thing look, that number of people dying compared to the population is this so it's harm is not hey, that's that's what you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, right?
Exactly.
Same concept.
Well, that's what happens when you propagandize entire 2.5 generations of vaccine misinformation, that it's totally safe and that it never harms anyone ever, and that there's no problems at all.
It's okay to be transparent. Why can't you be transparent?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the logic is so twisted right now. I see so many of the claims that people that push vaccines regularly say, they'll be if you really push people, there's no one that will tell you a vaccine is 100% safe. That's just stupid. Every drug has side effects. Every medical intervention has a risk. But people will debate how frequently severe vaccine injuries occur or what they are. And so if you push for numbers and you're okay, let's say it's 1 in a million or 1 in this or whatever, and then you look at how they're I've seen people over the years be people get, they don't operate off of statistics. They operate, emotionally. So they'll hear one story about a friend of theirs that had a vaccine injury and they'll be freaked out about vaccines. Yeah. And we have to look at the statistics. It's very rare that it happens, blah, blah. And then you turn around and you try and use that same logic with COVID. People are operating off of emotion. These stories about hospitals being overrun. Let's look at the statistics. They're you're down, blah, blah, blah. And I'm it's funny that we use different logic when it's totally. And I really see, and this is the other thing that's gotten to me, is that I feel like the entire medical paradigm right now is being driven by an ideology that acts like intervention is always better and the harms from intervention can't possibly be as bad as the harms from nature or the natural disease or the infection. That's so much worse. And they downplay the harms from medical interventions while, playing up the harms from something that comes from nature.
Always.
And to me, that I think, and this is more of a philosophical perspective, but I think part of that is rooted in our technocratic scientific revolution perspective of like, if we can bring nature to heal, if we can control nature, if we can, figure everything out, like we'll be able to be immortal and live forever and people won't have to die with our drugs and our medicine. And it's really erroneous and idiotic to think that our interventions are actually going to achieve that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is subtly underneath all of this, driving our perspective of always hyping up infectious disease and being super freaked out about it, while downplaying chronic disease that we're causing by our lifestyle and our diets and our medical intervention. When like the third leading cause of death in the United States is literally medical error. It's doctors. It's our medical system.
Yeah.
Third leading cause of death. Yeah. And yet we're like way more freaked out about an infectious disease because it's uncontrollable. I mean, that's just my take. I think that's part of the
well, can you just imagine a world where with this COVID thing, just imagine if we had zero media hype over that. I know this has never happened, but just like zero media hype over any of this. If you ever got sick, you were just on the vitamin C intravenous drip and mega vitamin D therapy. No, all fucking studies are just completely transparent and none of this BS. And we just didn't freak out about it. I bet this thing would be nothing. This thing would be like not a big deal at all. Yeah. If, and obviously this, but it's just exposing how unhealthy we are, and it's exposing so much. And I fully believe, I'm kind of hopeful that I do think this is whatever plan they have. It's more and more normal people are going to wake up and be like, not down with this, and
outside of academia and all that kind of stuff.
As loud as they are, as loud as this whole thing is going on, I really think that there's huge percentage of normal people are like, they're already so burnt out on this thing, and they're already so burnt out on the lies and the backpedal. And that's the other thing we could talk about just for a second. This whole thing of like, why does the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the CDC, all the COVID defenders, they're always willing to defend. They're like, well, they make mistakes. They can update their thing with new data. They can change their mind about masks and everything a million times. And it's like, these are health professionals that are paid trillions of dollars in tax dollars or billions or whatever to get it right. It's their fucking job, and it's like they're like backpedaling on IFR, and
what's IFR?
Like infection fatality rate and all that stuff. Yeah, and it's like, it's bullshit. It's like, and it's usually the same people that blame Trump for every death or whatever, right? And it's just so juvenile. It's so dumb. It's so.
I mean, I do think, I just have to say that it is okay for like public health officials to change their perspective. Like new science does come out, and like science isn't set. Like
that's not what's happening here.
No, I think some of the flip flopping is like very politically driven.
Exactly.
And any news is viewed as scripture. Like now I will say, like you said, it can prove itself wrong, but when it's given to you at the moment, right? Like Fauci said, dude, you don't need to wear masks in March. That was scripture at the moment, right?
Yeah.
There was never like, hey, wait for some updates, though. It was never on that. Right. It was never on that.
And the science has not changed that much since he changed his mind about masks. That's the other thing.
It's like, not a science thing,
very little science has changed in that time.
Yeah.
And I mean, a really good example, right? So California has had one of the more, out of all the states, they probably locked down earlier, mandated masks earlier. Like they've done everything right by the public health officials and Democrats especially. And then you look at Texas, which has like not done everything right, and people love to criticize because they've stayed open and they didn't mandate masks and blah blah blah.
Red state, typically.
Exactly. Right? So one state that's been taking this seriously from the beginning and done all these things right, yet their deaths are almost identical. And the deaths per capita, Texas is a little bit higher, but not by as much as you'd think for supposedly how badly they've treated this versus how well California has, which to me begs the question, if our interventions didn't work, that like if we did everything right that we were supposed to in California, why are deaths and infections still that high? Or maybe our shit doesn't work as well as we think it does. And if it doesn't, then maybe it is better to do nothing, because then at least we don't have the added harms of the lockdown and the job loss and all of this other stuff going on that Texas has been able to avoid.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I guess because I mean we could talk to you all night, but I do want to keep this to be a listenable episode as
Yeah.
far as
We'll be
time wise.
back.
We'll be back.
Yeah.
We'll do another one. Trust me.
Yeah.
We're gonna need a little more expertise on this. But I
Yeah.
guess I'm not sure what your background is on this or even your belief on this, but a privatized for-profit healthcare system. Obviously right now you're seeing kind of the downsides of it. You're just in real time too. Even people that are super like, oh no, I want my public option, all that kind of stuff. I want all that.
Mm-hmm.
But in a socialized healthcare system, right, where healthcare is
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed the same way that just it's subsidized in a way that, the firemen coming to, stop the fire at your house you don't get the bill from it. In that field, do you think that this is treated differently or more effectively? I guess. Do you think we're able to kind of grab this by the reins a little better?
I wish I could say yes, but like England and some of the Nordic countries and other European countries, they do have that system of more universal healthcare, and yet they are struggling as much as we are, if not worse in many cases. And they're all still pushing the vaccine. So, and I have been a fan of a universal healthcare system.
Right.
So, I do not like our for-profit private healthcare system. But to me, this problem goes so much bigger and deeper than that. Like that might fix a few of the problems, but the other thing I see is there's this huge focus among people that are talking about universal healthcare right now with it being all about drug prices. And to me, that kind of misses the point. Like the deeper issue is, why do we have so many people that need drugs and need this much medical intervention in the first place? And until we address that, we are still just scraping the surface and putting Band-Aids on a problem.
Exactly.
And so I don't like to see, I do think things should be affordable and going to the hospital should be affordable, but I also think fundamentally we shouldn't have people needing to be on this all these drugs and having the conversation just be about drug prices or vaccine prices or vaccine. Like we shouldn't need all that stuff and in the first place.
Well,
go ahead.
No,
it's part of the mainstream leftist thought is always based on a fundamental trust in the system, which will always be shown to be erroneous, right? That's kind of my thesis, at least, that, it's like the whole, like, I think healthcare should be free at the point of treatment,
because you could break your arm. You could break your arm, right?
Absolutely.
Something that's just cut and dry. We know what the solution to a broken arm is, right?
Exactly.
Like, there's no debate on that.
Medical care is really good at
I'm in a car accident. I'm fucked up. You know what I mean? Like we like take care of me. Like especially emergency situations, you should not have a bill for that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like so we get that. But I'm sorry, go on.
No, but just that there's always this fundamental, and it's the whole thing with the whole how every mainstream leftist believes in lockdowns and every mainstream leftist believes in the vaccine.
It's so
and everything,
fucking terrifying.
And it's like y'all aren't ready for what we're on. We were talking about some deeper shit. Like we can take this way further.
Yes.
And it's like you're gonna get everything you want and realize that we're not creating the world that we want, and we need to do deeper stuff. When it comes to preventative medicine and just holistic living.
Yeah, because they want subsidized. Their problem. I think the problem with a lot of like socialist leftists and stuff like that, and that's why I always felt like maybe I don't have a home on there, even though a lot of my beliefs might align with that kind of thing. But I feel like one is they're super aggressive about it. They're like anti-vax, nope, sorry, like you're not with me, and I'm like, wait, I wouldn't alienate you. You know what I mean?
Exactly,
but again, that becomes the personal freedom thing, which again, maybe puts a little libertarianism to it. You know what I mean? And things like that.
Totally.
Maybe it does. But a lot of these socialists, and I hear it from even some of my favorite podcasts, some of my favorite people, one, they're pro-mandatory vax, and two, their problem with the health system is it's not accessible, and not that it's not a piece of shit. You know what I mean? Like, and it's both. That's the thing. We would have to change both things. And we talk about this on this podcast a lot, is that even when you get what you want, your mentality still has to change on things, right?
It's like, do you want
subsidized McDonald's? I don't. I'm sorry. Like,
I was literally going to say that.
Like, do you want that? Like, I mean, look, some people might be like, yes, but like, to me, no, I don't.
You know what's funny about that? Kyle Kalinske admits he eats like McDonald's. He's like a huge McDonald's fan.
He is. They
kind
were eating it on. He had to turn it down on the Joe Rogan live stream. It was hilarious. He was like, because I ate it prior, Joe. I didn't know you were buying.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's so weird. It's so, which shows too. And I love Kyle. I'm not hating on, but I mean, it just shows how so much of this shit is just superficial bullshit when it comes to political projects, and and
right.
it's just we want the same world, we just want a different flavor on it. We want
it to be affordable, but it's the same thing that kills you with all these leading obesity, heart disease, and all that kind of stuff. It's like we would have to combat that as well. Like you'd have to,
and it also, and I hate to say it, this goes into, there's such a extreme anti-individual aspect of leftism where they're on the right, they're like, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You need, you're a maid that doesn't have healthcare. That's your fault, kind of thing.
Yeah, get a better job.
On the left, it's the opposite. It's like, I have cancer. It's the government's fault. It's like, well, hang on. Like maybe maybe the choices are in there too. It's kind of, and it's like, it's kind of the opposite extremes. And and it's,
there's nuance to it all. Like it's nuance to it all. So I'm sorry.
I totally am with you. I mean, up until very recently, like I would have, still somewhat do consider myself very much a leftist, minus the fact that I'm very critical about a lot of their perspectives at this point. And I have become more critical as I've watched what has happened this year, because this whole time, most leftists that I know have just been sitting on this, Trump is a fascist, Trump is a fascist. And I don't like Trump, like, don't get me wrong. But I'm sitting here going, no, what's fascist are like all these people that want to control our lives, control perfectly healthy people, mandate vaccines. And I'm like way more freaked out about that. And everyone is like, oh, it's public health. That's fine. But Trump is the fascist. And I'm like, oh my God, no,
it's
like
I am
bait and switch. Freaking out.
They were locked down watching that the whole time. Trump is literally Trump is a fascist. Trump is a fascist. Get this vaccine. Trump is a fascist. Trump is a fascist. Stay inside. Wash your hands. Trump is a fascist. Trump is a fascist. That was all. You can tell I have people in my family like this. That's all I'm saying. It's scary.
And it's like, which is actually impacting most people's lives more right now? Is it Trump's fascism or is it Corona fascism? Legitimately, people are losing their jobs. They're suicidal. They're not able to leave their homes. They're like legitimately. And then you look at like shit that's happening in Victoria, Australia. They've had some of the most draconian policies. I have a friend over there who they actually had a radius of 5 kilometers that they were not allowed to go past outside of their home. And there were police checkpoints. And if they went farther than 5 kilometers, they would get fined. Like my friend has been fined several times that you couldn't exercise outside in public for more than an hour, and you couldn't do it with more than one person from outside your home.
Too much vitamin D. Get back inside, buddy.
Like legitimately the government controlling, and they had way fewer cases than we ever have. And they were so freaked out about letting it spread at all that people have literally, like, buildings have been locked down with police surrounding them, so you can't leave to go.
Hawaii is like that as well. Hawaii is like that too.
Hawaii.
Like that is fascism. That is so draconian, and it's like, I'm not saying that coronavirus is very real. There are people dying from it. Like, I don't discount that at all. But it's like, this is exactly what has happened with every crisis, with 9/11, with every war or whatever. We 1,000%. Use that as an excuse to take away civil liberties, and they never give them back.
It's manufactured consent, 1,000.
Why can't, like, so many of the leftists I know see this now? Like, that's what really freaks me out.
You're on the right podcast, I'm telling you.
Straight up.
No, this is like, we've been beating a drum, and now everybody's going to be like, crazy. Another person that agrees with you. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But
I don't know why it's so hard to see the authoritarian nature of this. Like, Trump's throwing protesters in vans, and he'd drive them around for an hour and then like release them. Like that's fucked up. That shouldn't happen in America. You know what I mean? Like, Jesus Christ, like what is happening? Like this authoritarian strain of leftivism is so crazy. I'm starting to see how, I hate to say it, but like these these right wingers that are like scared of communism and shit, and like I'm starting to see why they're scared of that mindset, because it's so it just happens so quickly.
I won't ever fault somebody who's kind of apolitical right now, but then after all this is like, yo, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a leftist, because I don't like this. I lost my business, you know what I mean? I lost this, I lost my job, I lost all this kind of stuff. I would have rather rolled the dice, right? I would have, you know what I mean?
Because
what I could have done And look, if I'm in that less than somewhat 1% that dies, then hey, I'll take it. You know what I mean?
Because you know what? Leftists were offered, and Trump is all wrapped up in this with Trump TDS and everything like that. But leftists were offered a choice during this whole thing of you could care more about people starving and not getting economic stimulus, because we knew that Congress wasn't going to give us adequate stimulus. Like, that's just so obvious from the get-go. You know, it just wasn't going to happen. You're either going to get down with that, or you're going to like trip on a virus for a whole year. And everyone went the virus route, you know. And they're surface level critical of Nancy Pelosi or oh, we should get more stimulus, but like, don't go out of your house. And it's like, yo, and the whole meme of
you won't fight for it because you won't go outside. I was just saying on Twitter, like they're just like, okay, well, then what? You're the bully that took the lunch, and like, give me my lunch back, or what?
Exactly. Dude.
You know what I mean? Like it's exactly what that is, and it's like, give me a stimulus, or I'm sorry, or what? Like you're not going to get protest.
And it is a class thing, and a elite thing, and a coastal thing, because that's where all the jobs, you know, where people can fucking work from home and everything. It's all surface level, you know, bougie bourgeoisie kind of. I'm full on one of those dudes now, for sure. I still want all the same policies. I still want all the same, you know.
I want healthcare. I just, I'm not done there at healthcare. You know what I mean?
I'm very pro freedom at this point, which feels like it's weird that the word freedom feels like it's being associated with like being right wing now, and that like just saying freedom is like this.
That's been a long psyop. That's been
it's like that is really freaky to me, because it's like I think that. Yes, the world is incredibly unequal, and no, not everyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, so we need social programs. But ideally, I do think that we should all be free, and we should certainly be free to make our own medical choices and what gets injected into our bodies.
What happened is the and a lot of it's wrapped up in the 9/11 thing, because the freedom thing was like, let's go bomb other countries, and you know, and
imperialism.
Exactly. Yeah. But the whole thing with the right-wingers need to understand that we need dramatic wealth and financial redistribution, which is not an impingement on your fucking freedom, right? It's like, it literally creates a better world.
Taxes freedom for everybody don't make you unfree. Like, I'm okay with taxes
that do good things.
Exactly. Like, take some of my money, but let me live my life how I want.
But the left needs to understand that you can't control and micromanage people's fucking lives, and people hate that, and that'll never take off in a political program.
They're super echo chamber. Like, they're just it's within them, and whatever group chat they're in, they're like, this is what everyone wants. I guess, all right, let me, I don't want to end it on like a we're fucked note. Give me this, since you are kind of, I know both of you are like this, so kind of preventative health, right? So anybody that listened to this podcast that maybe was a little bit normie, right, might have been like, but you know, hey, everybody brought up good points, cited their sources, like, okay, cool. So if I want to live a healthier life, right, and I'm trying to look like I need to work, I have to work, I'm an essential worker, but what preventative health measures can I take, right? Besides vitamin D, we already talked about that. Dietary, anything like that, would you suggest to kind of combat this, right? Give your immune system the best chance at fighting this off.
Whole foods, plant-based diet. Eat as many plants and a wide variety of them as you can. Get rid of the meat and dairy as much as possible. Don't be just hitting up McDonald's. That's not going to help you right now.
They're making the McPlant. Have you heard?
I have. Well, I probably won't ever be eating at McDonald's, even with their McPlant.
Gotcha. They said if you to the Beyond, they're like, nah, they're good off the Beyond Burger, right?
The
stonks didn't hit hard enough.
But you go for the whole plant foods, vitamin D, and preventatively too, and this is a little bit more on COVID, if you do get COVID, don't take Tylenol as a fever reducer. That I think there's pretty decent science suggesting that COVID severity is linked to glutathione levels. And it is very well documented that taking Tylenol depletes your glutathione levels. So don't take Tylenol as a fever reducer if you get a mild case of COVID. And there's a supplement called NAC, N-acetylcysteine, maybe.
Okay.
Don't
Yeah,
quote me on
that's
that,
it.
but it's NAC, and
The liver
it
amino
helps your
acid.
I've
liver.
heard
It
of it.
boosts
I've heard of it.
glutathione levels.
Mhm.
And so if you were to get COVID or think you were exposed and were concerned, taking some of that preventatively, I think, would be a good supplemental choice.
There's
as
not
well.
it's not like a huge side effect on that, right? Either. It's
No,
not,
it's
yeah, wouldn't be-
I think you can buy it on
It's
Amazon.
used. It's a hospital tool. They use
Um,
it in hospitals for stuff and everything.
Got
Yeah,
it.
it's literally
it's
safe.
used
Yeah.
for like drug overdoses. Like if you
Yeah.
overdose on Tylenol, it
Overdose on COVID.
Yeah.
CNN.
Overdose.
Yeah.
Also, I heard
Coverdose.
well,
You just made the episode name. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just learned today that there was. I didn't know. Maybe you know more about this, but the whole food plant-based thing, for sure. But there's always the reasons for that, and the hydroxychloroquine thing, right? Which is controversial or whatever, but
Mhm.
there's actually a connection, like quercetin. Quercetin is.
Oh,
right?
I take
Yeah,
that. I
yeah.
take that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a mild natural form of HCQ, basically, right? Is what it's kind of
I
connected.
think
in
I
a
might
way.
have heard that actually.
And
Yeah.
so that's like apples and red onions and all sorts of natural shit, basically.
Got
and
it.
It's and so like and zinc, of course. I take zinc and vitamin D every day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All that.
Yep.
Yeah. And I work in the sun, so I'm like super like I'm pretty
And,
nourished in that.
Also, like a DHA, EPA, like omega supplement.
Okay.
I was just learning about this recently because that has a little bit of the effect of being a blood thinner. And one of the risks from COVID is that you can get blood clots. And so keeping your blood like slightly thinner by regularly taking omega-3 supplements is another good preventative measure.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. I mean, I thought it was a really good conversation. We'd love to have you back on sometime. I'm sure this isn't the last of this. So,
I'd be happy to. I mean, we didn't even get into the COVID vaccine and the details of that. So
yeah, exactly.
We'll do another one.
And we'll do it.
And you're getting into the. I don't want to blow it up or anything, but you're starting your own podcast yourself, right? And you're kind of
planning to. Yeah, it's in the works right now.
And it's all about the true nature of science and how things get distorted.
It'll be all about the nuance and not making things black and white. So I'm
sure it'll be really popular. Yeah.
So as we get closer to a vaccine rollout, I think we'll have to have you back on.
Yeah.
Because, okay. Cool. I'd love to.
I think we will. I think it'll be easy to set that up. So, is there anywhere anyone can find you, or do you want anyone to find you, or?
You can, I mean, it's going to be very different. It'll be, well, actually, I'll just say, Science is Gray. That's going to be the podcast. It'll be very related to stuff we talked about today. So I think you can go to scienceisgray.com right now.
Okay.
Gray with an E or an A?
I'm gonna do both, but I think it's with an A right now.
Get both those domains.
And I talk about veganism on YouTube on a totally somewhat separate topic.
Okay.
You're vegan from birth, basically, right?
Yeah, under Born Vegan.
Yeah.
So you can find me there on YouTube as
pretty
well.
wild. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well,
you're
thanks.
Better. You're beating all of us at our own game, basically.
Definitely.
You're way ahead of the
shut
game.
me out 58-0 Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. He skunked us. Yeah.
But so thanks, Sarina, for joining us. I really appreciate it. And this is Rare Candy Podcast. You can follow us at Rare Candy Pod 1. He's Crypto Sci. I'm at Glenn Rockney. And thanks again. That was a good episode. And we'll have you back on once that vaccine really starts getting rolling. So
yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sarina. All right.
Later.